In this episode of Goulet Q&A, I talk about why a fountain pen is called a fountain pen, why pen materials can really affect the pricing of a pen, and what a typical day looks like for yours truly. Hey there, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and this is Goulet Q&A episode number 112. It is February, what, 12th of, it's crazy, February 12th of 2014, 16, I don't even know what year it is. Sorry, it's been a long week for me, which I'll actually talk about in one of the questions, but it's been a lot going on, a lot of strategic planning kind of things, lots of meetings and stuff that I can't really go into great detail about, you know, kind of just long-term kind of stuff, but it's been a little nutty. So last week's Q&A, I feel like I'm gonna have a tough time following that up because that question that I answered about, you know, the pricing and stuff like that seemed to be the topic of conversation. I knew that it was going to be kind of interesting, but man, it really generated a lot of comments. Seen stuff popping up on Reddit and Fountain Pen Network and you name it, all over the place. So it's been very interesting. I appreciate everybody who commented on that. I actually got more of a positive response than I thought I would. So if you haven't seen that yet, go check it out in episode number 111. The question where I talk about undercutters, and it should be kind of an interesting conversation for you. So I don't know if I have anything quite as controversial this week, but I did get a few more really interesting business questions, so I'm excited about that, to get into those. I did finally do the interview with Liz Steele. It's a new series we're calling Goulet Guests. And it's a Skype interview that I did with Liz Steele. She's in Australia, but the fact that we can be across the world and then doing a video together is really cool. So if you're into urban sketching or into drawing of any type, Liz Steele's a great resource there. It's got a lot of tutorials and stuff. So we've linked up. She's a huge fan of ours. We're a huge fan of hers. So it was really natural. So she's kicking off this Goulet Guest series. So we have that posted up already. Check that out if you haven't seen it yet. It's pretty cool. And if that format of video, we're going to keep on doing that with other people, whether it's in the pen industry or kind of like in like tangents of the pen industry, people who use pens but do other things mainly, kind of like Liz. So we have the next one coming up. It's going to be Kara Benz from Boho Berry. She's a bullet journalist and does some really, really cool stuff there, has a website and really big Instagram presence as well. So lots of cool happenings there. So I actually did the interview with her yesterday. It's going to take us a little while to kind of edit it together and get it up, but that is going to be really cool. I think you're going to be excited to see that one. Kara's super, super cool, really on her game, so good matchup there. Product-wise, we got the Lamy Charged Green All-Star. It's the new special edition for 2016. Ooh, I have one somewhere. I should show it to you, because I did a video on it, but then we actually got them in. Where do I have it? No matter how much I try to plan, I always think of something. Here we go. Here's the Charged Green. It's a very much of a yellowish kind of green. I know it's not going to be everybody's flavor, but you know, there it is. So I've got a video on that. You can check that out. We got a sample ahead of time, so I posted a video comparing it to some of the other colors. But those are in now. We had the cartridges that came in. The bottled ink was waiting a little bit. It may or may not be, like the tracking is saying it's going to be sometime around when I'm making this video. So it may already be up or it may be coming up very soon. The ink, we've used it. It's nothing like mind-blowing. It's very light, kind of almost like a highlighter ink, really. So I know it's not going to be everybody's favorite, but we'll have that up soon. It's really hard to color adjust that one. Sarah's had double of the time with the scans of that one. So that's new. And we have Goulet Black Nibs. I talked about those last week. We are still having to check through them. We are very, very thorough with our nibs, but we are super thorough when we have a new type of nib that we launch. So it's going to take us a little bit of time. We're going to take as much time as it needs to really get through that. We bought a lot of them because I think that they're going to be very popular. So it's going to take some time. I know if you're excited about those, you're just like waiting and waiting, and I'm sorry it's going to take a little bit longer, but we want to make sure we do our due diligence when we launch these things. All right, let's get right into the questions for this week. I got a few good pen and writing questions. And this first question is really good. I'm 99.9% sure I've never answered this in Q&A, which is really exciting. And it's so simple, it's brilliant in its simplicity. So thank you to Donovan P on Facebook, who asks and says, never have I heard it asked or answered. Why is a fountain pen called a fountain pen? Why not a controlled leak pen? Well, okay, Donovan, essentially a fountain pen is a controlled leak, right? Like basically the way that fountain pens are designed is you have the pen itself, you have a reservoir of ink up here. I should use a clear pen to show you it a little bit better. Here we go. You have a reservoir of ink up here. You have the nib, of which I actually don't have one on this pen. That's kind of ironic. But you have the nib down here. There's a feed, you can see it, but you have the nib down here, and the air is exchanging with the ink as it's flowing out of the pen. So you have the feed up top here, the ink is flowing out through the nib. You have this channel on the bottom where air is flowing in. Otherwise, you would not have a proper, what's it called? Pressure, whatever, relieving exchange thing. Sort of like if you have a straw in a glass of water and you hold the top of the straw, you lift it up, the water stays in there. If you didn't have the air interchanging, it wouldn't flow. So you need that important relationship. That's kind of the basic fundamentals of the physics of how a fountain pen works. But basically, why is it called a fountain pen? That's a great point. So let me get into I'm going to very much talk on the surface level of fountain pen history way back in the day, like 1700s, 1800s. The way that you wrote was with a dip pen or a quill, you know, like literally like a feather quill that was cut and kind of shaped so that you could dip it into an ink well, like a bottle of ink. You would dip it and then you'd write, and you'd dip it, and you'd have to dip it every so often, and it was kind of inconvenient. If ever you wanted to write, you had to carry the bottle and the quill or whatever with you, probably several of them because they would wear out. As you know, metal kind of became more prevalent in being able to be shaped for nibs and stuff like that, you had to like the dip pens and stuff like that, but it's still, you had to dip constantly back and forth. So it was actually quite revolutionary when the fountain pen was developed in the late 1800s, because you could actually carry your ink with you in your pen. So you would have an ink well inside your pen. So if you think about what, ooh, I just dripped a little ink. If you have a well, then that means that you are going to have an ink spillage on your desk. Give me a second. I'm distracted by this. Okay, if you have a well, think about it like a water well, like old school, like you got to pump the well, like it's work. You have to pull it out of the ground to get your water from your well, right? So if you think about that like an ink well, you are having to dip and work to get that ink out of there. Versus, think about a fountain. It gushes out, it pours out on its own, as opposed to a well where you have to try to get it out of there. So that's where the name fountain pen originally came about, was as these pens with these internal ink reservoirs came about, they were referred to a fountain in comparison to a well, because it just flows on its own out of the pen as you write. So that's literally why it's called a fountain pen. Isn't that cool? So, a little bit of history there for you. I don't know who exactly came up with the term. I did a little research to try and find out who. I didn't really see who. Maybe some of you who are like really into the vintage pen history stuff can correct me on that and educate me a little bit. I would love that. If you can post in the comments, that'd be fantastic. Or if you know of any great resources there. So anyway, that's what's up. This next question is from Marcelo Duarte Ferrari on YouTube. I see Goulet Pens not carrying some pens with broad nibs, apparently in the more expensive lines. I love broads myself, but that's probably because I'm a lefty. If they don't sell that much, does Brian know why? I do. Or is it out of another completely different reason? Was Brian traumatized by a broad nib in his childhood? Well, I never used a fountain pen until I was 25, so it wasn't childhood trauma. And actually, I don't have anything against broad nibs. I actually love broad nibs. Rachel almost exclusively uses broad nibs. But the reason that broad nibs are not very popular is because, at least for us, which we're predominantly, you know, serving the US market, we do ship internationally, but the US makes up the largest portion. The paper that's widely available in the US is pretty atrocious for fountain pens. It's very absorbent. We have a lot of inkjet printers and stuff like that. The paper is really absorbent, and it's not very high quality. So when you're using a really broad nib, it like feathers and bleeds like crazy. It looks like you're writing with a Sharpie or something. So for most people, in most scenarios, unless you are buying your own paper that you can supply that's ideal for fountain pens, most of the paper that's readily available, unless it's like the really premium stuff, most of it's just not suited for broader nibs. So that's why they're not that popular. And the reason we don't carry a lot of them is because they just don't sell. Like we have, you know, for years always wanted to carry the full range of nibs, but as we look at sales data and we look at, you know, what pens have been sitting there, I mean, we'll literally have pens, broad nibs in certain models where we don't sell an entire broad nib in that pen for an entire year. And it's like, that's just not very good business. Like, you know, fundamentally, it's like I want to offer everybody everything, and people talk about like, oh, I want a lot of broad nib options, but if I'm looking at it and no one's buying it, then I'm really not serving anybody by offering it, because no one is buying it and no one wants it, right? Like that's, I have to be a businessman in that respect. I have, you know, especially you pointed out here about the expensive pens. Yeah, for something like a Visconti Homo sapiens, my carrying costs, my inventory cost is extremely high with the expensive pens. So if I have a broad nib that I know I might sell one a year, I can't afford to stock that in all the different, you know, finishes and all that kind of stuff if no one's going to buy it. So that's a kind of situation where it's more of a special order kind of thing. So we have an email, specialorders@gouletpens.com, where we can special order the broads and double broads and stuff like that in some of these high-end like Viscontis and all that kind of thing. Sometimes the manufacturers themselves sell so few of them, they discontinue it altogether. That's happening more and more with some of the broader nibs. Just the whole world really is going more towards fine and extra fines. Not as many broads out there. I think a lot of it's due to the paper. So I love broads. I would love to be able to offer them all, but I am literally serving the community with my business. So if I'm offering things that no one is buying and I have money, inventory that's sitting there on the shelf that is not moving, that no one wants those products, that is not serving my community best. I am better served discontinuing those things and then stocking up on other things, because I don't have infinite funds. I have to be smart like that. So I have to take and discontinue those things, take that money and put it elsewhere where I feel it could be better used to serve you all in the things that you actually want to buy. So that's kind of how things are working behind the scenes. It's really relatively simple. I have nothing against broads, but that's just the way that the world is going. This question is from Brian Jones on YouTube. Acrylic is a very popular material to make fountain pens. As a raw material, as far as I can tell, it's not that expensive. Just what goes into making an acrylic pen with a steel nib and plastic feed that makes them so pricey? I'm also ignorant to what resin means, or macrolon, or anything else that the industry seems to advertise as anything other than plastic. Any insight into the material science and or manufacturing complexities that make these things worth it to aficionados would be great. Okay, Brian, I think I can help you out a little bit here. Yes, raw material is a factor, but it's not always just the raw cost of material that makes it so expensive. A lot of it has to do with the labor and the machining that's involved in working with that material. You know, the resin is a pretty good example. I can talk to you a little bit. So like the reason that they don't just say plastic, first of all, plastic has, you know, a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people. Most people, when they think of plastic, think of cheap. So that's why, from a marketing perspective, saying, I have this Edison plastic pen doesn't really make it sound super appealing, right? But yes, it is a form of plastic. There's literally, I don't want to give an exact number, I want to say hundreds if not thousands of variations, formulations of plastic. There's lots of different types of plastic out there. I may be wrong in the exact number. Well, I didn't give an exact number, but I'm not a material scientist, I'm not a chemical engineer or anything like that, so please correct me if I'm wrong and way off base there. But there's basically, the idea is there's a ton of different types of plastic out there that have a variety of names, and they all serve different purposes. What you get typically from most fountain pens is acrylic acetate. That is the cast resin, as they call it. Resin is plastic. Resin is a form of plastic, and it's just kind of more of a general marketing term for plastic, okay? Just in general. Acrylic is another word you could use. Yeah, plastic. Precious resin, it's plastic. You know, so there's different, you know, varieties of it, but in general, it's all different forms of plastic. So why is this plastic any different than the plastic from, what do I have here? Pilot G2, right? $2 pen or whatever. and then $150 pen. What makes the difference? Aside from this is a roller ball fountain pen. But this is an injection molded plastic. It's a different type of plastic. And the way that they make these types of pens is they have these large molds that are made that cost anywhere between $100,000 and $250,000 to make one mold for injection molded resin pens. And when you have these, your goal is high volume, low cost. So these molds are incredibly expensive. So pens like this, Platinum Preppy, things like that are very inexpensive because they produce them in huge quantities in these injection molded machines. So they take the cost of the mold and the machine to make them, and they distribute that across many millions of pens, right? So the cost comes down quite a bit. When you're dealing with this type of resin, this is a cast resin, acrylic acetate. It's not injection molded into a machine. You can see shows of like how it's made. That show. There's a lot of cool things in there, showing like some injection molding and stuff on various products. But when you're dealing with a cast resin, the way that this works is it is a mix, sort of more of like an epoxy. It's like mixed up, and then it's spread out into a sheet, and then it's let cure in a sheet form, and then they cut it into rods, and then they take those rods and they turn them one by one on a lathe to reveal the final pen form. It's a much more time-consuming process. It's not just about the cost of the material. The cost of the material is higher. It's considerably higher proportionally than an injection mold, but it's more about the labor and the output and what you're able to actually produce. So making something out of cast resin is going to take you much more time than it would an injection mold. So what's the difference there? Why would that matter? Well, the plastic is a little bit different. You definitely get a little more scratch resistance, a little more durability sometimes with these cast resins. It depends on how it's made and stuff like that. But the main difference is the appearance. So it has good stain resistant properties, but also the appearance. You can get swirls, like deep pearlescent swirls, stark color variations. You can put pearlescent powders and things like that in it. You can get them to just look much more dramatic than you can with injection molding. That's a lot of the reason why you go with acrylic acetate. So there's other variations too. You like the Noodler's pens. They're a different variation. They're actually a variation of a celluloid. It's a cellulose material that is part of how it gets its distinctive smell, but it's even different than acrylic acetate is. So there's lots of different variations that can affect the material cost is simply one aspect. So I have a variety of other pens here that I can touch on a little bit as to the pricing. Ebonite is another material that is used kind of traditionally in fountain pens, you know, especially in the early 1900s. It's basically a hard rubber, like a vulcanized rubber. And it has some nice properties to it. You know, it's got a little bit more grip to it because it's hygroscopic, so it absorbs some of the moisture in your fingers as you write, so it's less fatiguing. It's also very durable, and it has a unique smell to it, kind of a rubber smell. So there are some advantages there to ebonite, but this material is much more expensive. There's not that many companies that make ebonite these days. I think there's maybe literally one or two companies that make ebonite these days. I could be wrong on that, but I don't believe it's very many, just because there's not a lot of uses for it. The main use, I think, aside from pens, is in pipes and pipe stems. That is another material. So usually you're going to see ebonite pens are much more expensive, mainly because the material is just so hard to come by. You got some other kind of specialized ones. You mentioned macrolon. Macrolon is the material, I believe it's a Lamy proprietary material. It's a mix of fiberglass and resin. So you're going to get this kind of industrial look to it. It's got kind of this grayish black look. It's a brushed kind of thing. But that's what's going on in Lamy 2000. Very, very durable, but it's unique to them. So it's not, you know, it's really the only pen that has it that I'm aware of. So it's hard to say if it's worth more than the whatever. They make a stainless steel Lamy 2002 that's twice the price. So there you go. Stainless steel itself is not necessarily that much more expensive than this, but it's the machining cost that's much higher. Some other things, you've got a blend of resin and celluloid. Like Visconti has theirs, they call it acryloid. Omos has it, they call it cotton resin. So it's kind of a hybrid blend between a resin plastic and a more organic celluloid material. Celluloid is something that is an older kind of version of plastic. It kind of preceded modern plastics. Celluloid is still used in some pens today, but you're going to pay very much of a premium. The Delta Dolce Vita, the orange, is kind of, you know, very recognizable for a lot of pen folks. This is the oversized one, which is pretty massive. But that orange is a celluloid. You can get really interesting patterns in celluloid. It's very deep material. The feel of it, it's subtle, but it's different than just a typical resin. It's a little bit smoother feel, and it's a natural material, so it's kind of self-polishing in a way. Like as you rub it with your fingers over time, it kind of like works out its own fine scratches and stuff like that. So it's just kind of an interesting material. But celluloid itself, I've talked to, you know, folks at Delta about what it takes to actually make this material. It takes literally about 1.5 to 2 years for the celluloid to cure. It's very flammable in its manufacturing process, and it is actually flammable. If you think about nitrocellulose, the old like film, like movie film that they used to do, it's a similar kind of, you know, cellulose that's used in these pens. So if you take an open flame to your celluloid pen, it will light on fire. So you don't want to do that. It's not like you have to worry about like a spark coming and blowing up your pen or anything like that. But especially in the manufacturing process, it's very toxic. It's very hard to manufacture, and the cure time is just so long. So it's very expensive to manufacture that particular material and prepare it for use in a pen. A lot of the other uses for celluloid are actually, I believe, in like expensive designer like eyeglass frames and things like that. So some other materials that I have. There's, you know, this lava rock, basically, that you have in the Visconti Homo sapiens. It's not just straight up lava rock, because lava rock is very, very permeable, so water can work through it very easily. So they take and they pound it up and make it into like very fine powder, and then they've tested all different kinds of resins to cast it into. So it's you know, it's very much the lava rock, but it's cast into a resin so that it doesn't basically leach ink out of the pen as you're trying to write with it. So a lot of really, you know, good durability and things like that, but they literally have to like harvest this out of a active volcano, Mount Etna in Florence. They harvest that out of the volcano, pound it up, grind it up, cast it into resin, turn it into the pen. Very expensive process. That's part of why the Homo sapiens costs so much. And then the last one, you know, there's various metal pens as well. You know, Lamy All-Star is a good example. You know, so you can get like aluminum, and you can get, these can be a little more mass-produced, kind of like the injection molded, versus there are some finer metals, you know, that you get into that can be, you know, like think about like David Oscarson or some of these like designer brands, you know, some of the Mont Blanc pens and stuff like that. Even metal, you can get into some kind of very fancy metallurgy, if you will, with pens that can affect the cost quite a bit. And then, you know, I'll top it off here with something like a maki or urushi. You know, so these, this is a rodin, so it's basically small bits of mother of pearl, abalone shell, that are put into, literally placed into here, and then cast with urushi lacquer. The material cost is, you know, something, but it's the labor. It's the labor and the craftsmanship that goes into it that makes this pen a list price of $2,800. So yes, material cost factors in for sure, but usually it's the labor and what's involved in actually doing the manufacturing process that affects it more than just the material itself. So I think you can, as you're kind of shopping around and looking at the prices of pens, you can see, you know, what you're going to generally pay for these materials. Yes, there tends to be some correlation between how much a raw material might cost and how much you end up costing for the end product, but it's usually more of a correlation of those raw materials that are more expensive are also more expensive to work with, which is why it's going to cost a lot more. So there you go. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight. Oh, and I forgot one more. Okay, wood. So there are wood pens out there. There's not a lot of them, but wood is a natural material. It's very difficult to work with because it can split and crack and has a lot of imperfections. So wood, I mean, grows everywhere around us. Wood's not an expensive material in its raw form. You can get some really exotic woods that are somewhat expensive, but in a pen form, you're not using that much. Again, that's just to reiterate even more, it's the labor and what's involved in the prep work to make a successful pen out of it. All right, next question is from Brigido R. Brigido, I don't know how you say it. Brigido R on Facebook. Forgive me for botching your name. I said it 2 different ways, so one of them was wrong. You have mentioned, or maybe they're both wrong. You've mentioned before how you don't believe lending your pen to somebody else for a moment changes the nib in any significant way, unless they damage it. Pens don't adapt that quickly. Yeah, that's what I believe. However, what are your thoughts on lending it to your other hand? I'm talking about ambidexterity, of course. While left-hand dominant, I often let my right hand do the talking, so to speak. Do you think this will negatively impact my nibs in the long run? Should I have specific pens to use with each of my hands? I wanted to take this question just because I think it's super cool that you're ambidextrous. That is not very common. I think it's something like 1% of the population is ambidextrous, something like that. It's not very many people. Maybe it's even less than that. So that is just super cool. I personally really don't write well. I think my 4-year-old daughter writes better than I do when I try writing with my left hand. Maybe it's just a practice thing. I haven't really practiced a lot, but it's just not natural for me. So the fact that you can do that is super cool. And so for those of you out there, small percentage where this might apply, I don't think that there's really any issue at all, pretty much. Now, there are some considerations when writing with your left hand to be taken into account, and I actually made a video on that after many years of getting asked a lot about fountain pen questions for lefties. I put together a Fountain Pen 101 video. You can check that out. It's definitely worth watching because I think it dispels a lot of the possible rumors and squelches some of the concerns you might have writing left-handed. It's not that different than writing right-handed. I know a lot of people who are left-handed that write with all the same pens and inks and everything that right-handed people do. A lot of it has to do with your hand position. So that video will explain a little bit more of that. But basically, in terms of a pen, unless you have stub nibs or flex nibs and you're writing at certain particular hand positions, you really don't have to factor in a lot of differences for your pen when you're writing with your left hand versus with your right. The biggest issue you have is if you're writing so that your hand is crossing directly over your writing, you may want to use a faster drying ink or maybe go with you know, a smaller nib size so that it's putting less ink down on the page, but that's about it. It's not, in terms of what you're asking here, like will it cause any harm to the pen? No, not really, unless you're like really cramming your nib down into the paper and like bending and jamming it, which would be bad if you were right-handed too. There's really not any special considerations you need to make, other than perhaps based on your hand position, some pen, ink, paper combinations may be a little better for you than your right hand, but you don't have to worry about specifically buying it for the sake of the pen's health, to answer your question there. All right, folks, got some good business questions this week, and I'm really excited to kind of get into these because I'm fascinated to talk about, you know, businessy things, because this is more and more where I'm spending a lot of my mental energy these days. So I'm happy to share some of these insights to you. I personally find it terribly interesting when I see other business people talking about how they do things, because I'm one who observes and picks up on what a lot of other people say. So that said, I have a question from Mary D on Facebook. As your company grew, you had to develop specialized roles and eventually departments and reporting structures. What was or is your biggest challenge in managing that aspect of growth? Yes, this is a constant challenge. Always is, always will be in every business, everywhere, whoever has people in it, right? I think the biggest challenge, and I've gone from being just me and my wife doing this to now we have about 35 people here at Goulet, and that's not that big, but it also is that big. You know what I mean? Like it's certainly something that I never thought we would see, and it's kind of amazing to me. But the thing is, the biggest challenge that I've found to be every step along the way has been clarity. So that encompasses a lot of different components. I think it has to deal with managing expectations on the part of the hirer as well as the hiree. What is somebody expecting to accomplish on the job? What are they expecting to learn and grow and kind of develop in their career? Someone I'm bringing on, what am I expecting them to do? Am I communicating that clearly to them? Is there clarity? And that's part of what the whole interview process is supposed to help with. So having to do things like job postings, job descriptions, key result areas, development reviews, checking in regularly on progress, doing goal setting, all that kind of stuff. All of these efforts are really just to help provide clarity. So there's a number of steps of things that we do here. We have regular one-on-one meetings between managers and their teams that we do sometimes weekly, sometimes twice a month. Depends on the team and what the dynamics are, and how long someone's been here and stuff like that. But basically whatever the needs are. But we have very intentional, regular communication so that we can help to provide some of that clarity. We also do a regular weekly company meeting. So literally we take an hour at the end of every Tuesday. That's what we've been doing for a while, that timing. And the whole company, we go and sit in a room for an hour. And we talk. We have each of our leaders, department leaders, if you will. So Drew, our customer care manager, will get up there and talk about what customer care is doing, what challenges they're facing, what wins they've had. He'll read letters from customers, talk about, emails that were particularly challenging or particularly successful. Usually those two coincide. So we can have people across the company get a perspective on what customer care is going through. We'll communicate, so we'll have each department kind of do that. We have a fulfillment department, we have inventory who deals with, ordering the products and quality issues and stuff like that. A media team that helps with exactly what we're doing here. And then HR. So all of our people issues, birthdays and celebrating anniversaries and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of that intentional communication. That's also things where we can talk about, larger kind of company visions, and we incorporate our values into it. We have literally the first 5 to 10 minutes of every meeting, we talk about the values that we've all seen each other living out across the company. So it's a special time for us to sit down and kind of celebrate that, entrench kind of that strong sense of culture that we have here. Literally all this is tying back to clarity, just being really clear about kind of who we are, what we stand for, how we should behave, how we should all act as a part of this company, which ideally resonates with everybody individually anyway. So it's all there. So training, communication, all of it is clarity. So yes, that's been my biggest challenge. I like to say that I have like a master's degree, maybe even a PhD, maybe not quite, maybe a master's degree from the School of Hard Knocks, which colors are black and blue. So yes, I have a college degree, but not much of it prepared me for what we do in this business, let me tell you. All of it has been based on having made just about every mistake until there's none left, right? So, it's been, going through a lot of just leadership error and just having to learn the hard way. I aggressively read and try to learn from others as much as possible. I try to network and communicate with other business owners as well, so I can try to learn and gain experience from them without having to cause pain to my team. But still, there's just so much complexity to running a business like this that mistakes are going to be made. So being clear about expectations, I find, has helped more than anything in being able to successfully grow. And that includes, for you all as our fans, customers, people viewing us a little bit more from the outside, being clear about who we are. We have a mission statement and a purpose statement and things like that that make it clear that, yes, we're not going to go start selling like trampolines and water balloons, right? Like we do fountain pens for the fountain pen community, and we focus on comprehensive education, exemplary service, and products we believe in. Those are the things we focus on. So you notice like beating people on price is not a core value of ours. That is not fundamentally something we're going to always strive to do. For other companies, it is. We talked a little bit about that last week. And that's fine. That's the way that they want to run their business, but that's not who we are. So we need to be clear, even for ourselves, about who we are so that we can maintain focus as we grow and get bigger and have more and more and more opportunity. I think that a lot of companies, when they reach, kind of that rhythm of success, 3-5 years in maybe, what actually ends up being more of their downfall is actually their success rather than their failures, because you start to get so much opportunity as you have a little bit of a track record of success, that you can spread yourself so thin, you confuse your customer base, you are trying to be the jack of all trades, master of none, and you're not focused anymore. So I think it's that much more intentional to harness that clarity and that vision and really try to stick to that. It's very difficult to do, and we've sidestepped here and there a little bit and had things we've kind of started going off and coming back, and it's never going to be perfect. But man, without that intentional kind of focus on that clarity, it makes things much more challenging. And especially once we start to get this size, communicating and being consistent about that becomes really important. One thing that Dave Ramsey and his team always say is, the CEO should be called the CRO, the Chief Repeating Officer, because you got to say that consistent message and speak that consistent vision for where you're going time and time and time and time and time and time again. They say if those that are closest to you are rolling their eyes as you're saying it, you've almost said enough. You know what I mean? So as my leadership team, like, they should all know it so well that it just comes naturally out of their mouth, so that I can't be everywhere at all times. So that consistent message and vision needs to be spread throughout the whole company. So that's where a lot of power comes from, that unity, that clarity that comes from running a team like that. And it's really hard to do. I am definitely not that great at it. I'm always trying to get better. So I'm not trying to be down on myself or anything. It's just I'm very young, I'm very inexperienced, and I'm intentionally trying to kind of make up for not lost time, but trying to be ahead of my years in that way to run a very intentional company in that respect, to be really clear. And I think I'm on the right track, but I'm definitely not that experienced, that well practiced at it. So we're getting there more and more every day, but that has to be kind of the biggest challenge, is that clarity. Next question. Simon Raul-André on Twitter asks, Brian, how do you keep your employees motivated to work so hard, and how do you gain their respect while being friendly? This is a good question. It kind of bounces a little bit off the previous one. How do I keep them motivated and work so hard? I think the important thing to keep in mind for any company that kind of has aspirations to really be just a great place to work and have a lot of motivated people. Everybody kind of wants motivated people. So the thing to keep in mind is that you can't really motivate people unless they want to be motivated. You know what I mean? I mean, you can do little incentives here and there for kind of some short bursts of motivation, but that's really no different than having something on sale to get somebody to buy it real quick. Does that really have long-term loyalty? Some might argue yes. I would say probably not. So it's you don't want to do the carrot and stick kind of thing, as that's what most people think of motivation in terms of incentives, incentive programs and bonus programs and stuff like that. And certainly sometimes those things are warranted for short sprints and depending on what it is you're trying to do. But that is not, like, you can't hire an unmotivated person and put some kind of program in place that will make them a motivated person. So you don't motivate people, you hire people who are motivated. That's really the important thing to keep in mind. And that can be tough because there's a lot of people out there who aren't motivated, or they might be motivated, but it's just to get a better paycheck, or it's just to get a job. It's not to really be tied to the work and really better themselves and be a part of something great. That is actually a very challenging part of what we do here, is just hiring the right people in the first place. We have a very intentional hiring process, and that kind of builds upon what I just said in the previous question of clarity being one of the most important things when you're growing a business, is if you are getting motivated people who are just naturally kind of have that internal motivation, and you give them a very clear vision with a unified team, man, they can plug right into that and hit the ground running. If they're not a part of that and you're not clear about who you are, they come in and they're not that motivated, you're hopeless. You're not going to do it. So you need to first check yourself. Me, I'm talking to you. I don't even know where you are in life, but me, I need to check myself and make sure I'm doing everything I can to make this company great. that will motivate people in and of itself, just being a part of something really cool like that, right? Like you can imagine being here, there's a certain energy that we have just from kind of like the traction we've had and the growth and just all the cool things we're doing. It's really hard work. We work really freaking hard here. Let me tell you, all of our team, everybody's exhausted right now. Like we are literally, you know, we're like at like holiday season time right now. Like we anticipated, you know, a dip after the holidays. We got a little dip in January, and now we're still really stinking busy. And so we're in the process of hiring more and so on. It's just everybody's kind of tired a little bit, and they're working really hard. But man, we really work at a click, at a steady click around here, and that would not be possible with unmotivated people. It's amazing to me. Like I talk to some of my team, and they're like, I have friends who go to work and they're painting their nails all day because they don't have anything to do. And they're like, I just can't even imagine what that would be like. And I'm like, I can't imagine what it's like to run a business where you're hiring and paying people to paint their nails. Like, what a poorly run operation. And maybe you work at a place like that, and I can't judge everybody. You know, it's like, certainly there's situations, I don't do things perfectly around here, that's for darn sure. But even still, like, you know, that to tie back in, like, you know, everybody's got a different motivation. Where you find the most success is, you know, it's not like a person is either motivated or not, but there are things that motivate everyone. And I think a lot of what we do in our hiring process is we try to find what is it that naturally motivates this individual, and we try to discover that. And if we find that someone wants to come on, they're naturally extremely motivated about childhood development, and they want to be a teacher, and they want to do all these kind of things, but they're kind of like, like skirting around and trying to like interview their way through the job interview, you know, and really kind of get through it. We're like, we'll dig that stuff up and be like, look, it sounds like you really want to be a teacher. What are you really going to do that's going to tie to this? How is this going to fit into your long-term goals? And they're like, well, I really just kind of need something to tie me over until I can get to school and all that. And we're like, that's cool, but that's what you know, get more of just a job for. Like, that's not what happens here. That's not what we strive for here. We want to build you, we want to invest in you, try and make you you know, further you along in your career. If this is just a holding place for you, it's not going to be that satisfying, because we demand too much around here in this company. We demand too much out of somebody who's just kind of looking for a placeholder. So, you know, what we like to do is when we go through the hiring process, we like to, we have a kind of a saying that says, we want to hire people with batteries included. You know what I mean? We want to hire people who kind of bring that energy just naturally. And as we're talking about what we do and what their role would be, are they kind of lighting up? Are they kind of bringing some energy with them, bringing some passion with them? Not in a short-term thing, because we do a multi-step interview process. So if somebody's trying to fake their way to themselves or to us about being happy doing what they're doing, it's pretty much gonna come out in the interview process. That's kind of why we extended a little bit, a little more of the Dave Ramsey kind of ideology of like, let's extend the interview process and make people go through some stuff so that it really comes out, like, do they actually want to be here? It takes a lot of time to do that, and sometimes that can be difficult and frustrating, but even still, hiring the right people, man, there's no better way you can motivate or manage someone than to just hire the right people in the first place. So that is definitely a business ideology that I have that not all other companies have. Some people are like, hire fast, fire fast. And it's funny, when Rachel and I went to an event in New York City at the end of 2014 called Business Gets Personal. It was hosted by Dave Ramsey, Seth Godin, and Gary Vaynerchuk, three of my business people that I have looked up to for many things in the past. Dave Ramsey is very much of the hire slow, draw the process out, have multiple steps, be super intentional, and make sure they're the right person before they get in the door. Seth Godin and Gary Vaynerchuk, they're up in New York City. They're much more like hire fast, fire fast. Like, get them in, you'll know in 5 minutes if they're the right, 30 seconds if they're the right person when you start the interview. And it's like, okay, so that's certainly a way, that's certainly an approach. Not everybody has a good gut instinct like that, especially when you start hiring and making other people responsible for that. They might not have the same good instinct as you do. It can be a little risky, but they had kind of a post-discussion thing at that event, and they kind of butted heads about it. And these are all very successful business people. So to see them kind of lock horns a little bit about that specific issue of how quickly you should hire someone, it literally, like, the conversation had to stop, and it was like agree to disagree kind of thing. So I think it's kind of neat that, a lot of it comes down to, like, who are you? What kind of company are you running? What is your approach? For us here, it's been the more of the hire slow approach. Make sure they're the right people before they come in the door. Now, we've been practicing for the last 5 years to get that right, and that's a whole other story. But that's a lot of it. And then the second part, kind of how do you gain their respect while being friendly? Respect is a funny thing. It's something that you can never force upon anyone. You can do everything that you can to try to gain somebody's respect and still never get it. It's very much, it has to be earned, and it's a two-way street. Some people get respect, certain people, certain celebrities and stuff might get respect just because of what they've achieved, but they may not have the greatest personal role model situation going on, so they may have some undue respect that's given on, or things people may have respect because of their position, but maybe not because of their personal life, or they could have a lot of respect for who they are personally, but not, they might be somebody who maybe wouldn't be traditionally considered as a very, impressive position of some kind. So it's really got nothing to do, I view, as kind of the authoritative position. I think that actually for me, I've really strived to have kind of a servant leadership mentality where the higher up we go, the more people we have, the more responsibility I feel to serve everyone here really well. So I think having kind of that mentality probably helps. It's definitely something I continually practice, and I'm not that great at it, but I'm trying to get better every day. So being respectful while being friendly, I think a lot of it just has to do with caring about your people a lot, always trying to be relatable. If you continually have your own ivory tower kind of meetings and just say here's what I've decided, go make it happen, that can be a challenge sometimes. Whereas when you're seeking to have discussions and collaborate and get feedback from everybody, include things, do things like whole company meetings, and you have Q&A sessions where people can ask you about, hey, you said you were going to do this thing last week, have you done it yet? Literally just this past Tuesday, we had our company meeting. We had talked previously about some of our 2016 goals. So this week's company meeting, we talked about something, an initiative that I can't discuss. And somebody was like, well, hey, what about this thing? Have you made any progress on it? I literally had somebody on my fulfillment team say, hey, you said you were going to do this thing. Where's the progress on that? And I was like, well, you're right. Here's what's going on. We've had this other thing come up, and this person was going to help me with that, and they're really tied down right now. So I'm shifting some things around. I'm going to delay that a little bit and let them kind of do. So I'm having this kind of discussion. I feel like that having that kind of transparency, especially with our team, probably helps a lot in that way. So a lot of it just has to do with being vulnerable. Not trying to be this super I do everything right and I know everything, so you should do what I say. And I have some guidance and help and maybe perspective that people don't have, but ultimately I try to delegate and empower our folks who are kind of closest to the work to be empowered to make the decisions, not without a safety net, but in that way. So I think that probably helps in that way. All right, good business questions this week, right? All right, Kevin L on Facebook has another good one that kind of touches on last week, and we'll see where this one goes because I'm a little less studied economically on this, but we'll see where it goes. Excuse me. Kevin L on Facebook said, during last week's Q&A session of the Fountain Pen Masterclass, we discussed the race to the bottom and how it affects both retailers and consumers. Does the race to the top have similar effects on both parties? It's interesting because actually that blog post from Pen Economics called The Pilot Pricing Puzzle, that was the one that I alluded to last week regarding some of the undercutting and stuff that goes on in the fountain pen world. In that same blog post further down, Jonathan talks about the basically kind of two different approaches that companies can really take. It's really kind of only two approaches they can take, which is high volume, low margin. So you're talking selling a lot of less expensive things, or low volume, high margin. So getting into kind of more exclusive, higher end products, but selling fewer of them. And what's interesting about what he talked about there, well, before I get into that, I'll say I did a little bit of research about the term race to the bottom and race to the top. That typically is associated with more of a socioeconomic, governmental regulation kind of thing, deregulating banks or deregulating certain industries. The race to the bottom typically is much more of a macroeconomic thing. That means that when something is deregulated and not price controlled, then what happens is there will be a natural equilibrium, the competition will set in and drive the price down to its natural place. that's a little bit different than what I talked about last week, actually, because that's more of a gray market discussion, what happened last week, of, you know, goods on the gray market versus not, as opposed to just kind of more a competition in general, race to the bottom. So there's some overlap there, but anyway. So you talked about like a race to the top, which generally a race to the top is referred to as, rather than trying to like deregulate and drive competition to the lowest price, you know, a la Amazon is a good example. Like Amazon is trying to drive to the lowest price. Anybody who lists on Amazon, they have their prices compared, and they list the lowest price at the top, and then all the more expensive stuff is further down. So that incentivizes, you want to be on the top of any search listing, right? So that's literally driving everyone to try to have the cheapest price. So that's the race to the bottom, right? Literally, like macroeconomically, that's what that is. The race to the top is different. It's driving more, and usually it's hard to kind of incentivize this, but usually it's kind of incentivized through like taxes or incentives from like a governmental standpoint to try to drive innovation and entrepreneurship. So it's basically saying, like, rather than driving everyone to the lowest price, we want to try to add value so that, yes, things will be more expensive, but there'll be perhaps better products and better services that would come out through innovation than there would be otherwise just driving on low price. Generally, low price doesn't drive towards a lot of innovation necessarily. It just drives towards more cheap stuff. So in terms trying to adapt like these like kind of large economic principles to more of like this situation here, I think you know, a good example would be taking, you know, pens, like, you know, using Pilot as an example here. I'll just throw that out. I didn't even make those notes, but the race to the bottom would be the Metropolitan, right? Like it's a very affordable pen, I think, and it's less expensive in the US than the Cocoon is in Japan and the MR is in Europe. It's literally like there's a big price difference, and I don't know exactly why. I've asked, like, why is this pen so cheap? Like it should be about a $40 or $45 pen, like based on kind of all I know about all the pens and stuff like that, and where the value and quality of it and stuff like that. I really feel like it could be a $45 pen. Really could. Think about like the Lamy All-Star and other pens that are pretty comparable to it. It could fit right in there, but it's a $15 pen. It's kind of amazing that it's that cheap. So I think that you know, probably Pilot has taken intentionally this high volume, low margin approach towards that. And there's a couple of reasons why you would do that. And essentially there's branding, marketing. You know, the lower you go and the more accessible you make it from people, the more people's hands it's going to get into, the more it's going to get talked about, the more brand awareness you're going to get. So, you know, it could be a loss leader. You know, and again, I don't know this specifically about the Metropolitan, but I'm just using that as an example. So if you have a loss leader, it gets a lot of people talking about, oh, Pilot this, Pilot that, Pilot, 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 Pilot. And then Pilot's search rankings, and it'll be a brand that a lot of people associate. So when they go to shop for other Pilot pens that aren't as kind of low margin as that, then, you know, it can kind of even itself out. So there's that approach to it. A lot of it can be production based too. So for example, you know, there's huge investments that are involved in the manufacturing side of things. Setting up factories, hiring specialized workers, having specialized equipment, customized equipment, and stuff like that. So a lot of times you'll actually have restrictions based on your size and equipment and number of people that you have from a manufacturing standpoint. So, you know, and actually Jonathan addresses that in the Pilot pricing puzzle blog post, talks about how, you know, there are some manufacturers that just aren't that big. So if they really can't do a lot to increase their production. So really kind of the only lever they can pull is going low volume, high margin, right? Like Visconti as an example. They don't have that many people that work at Visconti. I think the Goulet Pen Company is larger than the Visconti, you know, manufacturing in terms of number of employees and stuff like that. I don't think they're very big because there's a lot of environmental factors and governmental factors. You know, in Italy, the ways that you have to run the business are very different than in the U.S. You know, from a managerial standpoint and an economic standpoint. So there tend to be a lot of very small companies in Italy. A lot of the basically like pretty much all the small pen companies I can think of that come out of Italy, they're all just very, very small companies that do, you know, they don't do a lot of high volume stuff. They tend to go more the route of the higher end kind of expensive stuff. So that's more the race to the top. So a good example is like Visconti, right? Like Visconti doesn't have a lot of very low priced products. They have a lot of high priced products because they have very specialized skills. The Dante Del Vecchio, the guy who founded the company, is extremely innovative, and they've done a number of really cool things with their pens. So that's a race to the top. Like, you pay a premium, it is expensive, but they're doing cool, innovative things that wouldn't happen otherwise. There's no other lava pen, right? Like, so they're doing cool stuff like that. You're not going to get that with Bic, right? Like somebody that just pumps out pens all day long. So it's interesting, a company like Pilot specifically, because they have things like the G2 that's like, you know, I think the G2 accounts for something like 60% of the rollerball market in the US. Like, they're everywhere. So they're very universal, very inexpensive, versus Mach-E, you know? So this is very, you know, you could say it's more traditional, perhaps not as innovative, but from an artistic standpoint, they're very innovative in their designs that they come up with. But they might only sell a couple of dozen of these pens, you know what I mean? So they're very expensive. So just different ways of doing things. I think that it's good to have both, honestly. I like being a retailer like I am, as opposed to a manufacturer, because I get to enjoy the benefits of both. I get to enjoy, you know, the Metropolitans and the Preppies and the Lamy Safaris and these lower priced pens that get a lot of people into this magnificent, magnificent lifestyle of using a fountain pen. But I also really appreciate Viscontis and the Namikis and these higher end pens that are doing some really innovative and kind of special things. But it's not going to be for everybody. You're never going to have a price war on a Namiki pen, right? Because it's just, there's just not enough of them. It's not a commodity like that. So it's nice to have a balance of both. I generally, in terms of the way that we run our business, tends to be a little bit more of the race to the top mentality, but I'd like to have a blend of like really affordable, accessible products, but also kind of educate and service from a high standpoint. So I will say probably I have a lower margin from a business standpoint because I provide, you know, I set out to provide with this company. My team is really providing it on a daily basis. That high touch service for a lot of low margin items. That's something not a lot of businesses strive to do, because it's very challenging and it's very expensive to do it that way. But it's more of a kind of a fundamental belief that I have, and I want to do it that way because the fountain pen community to me is something very special, and I'm very kind of connected to it, to all of you. And I remember what it was like to be new and not know anything about pens, and I want to provide that high service in the most affordable way I can. But I also really appreciate the drive and innovation. I think there's a lot of cool things with fountain pens that can continue to drive moving forward. So it's kind of a nice little interesting dichotomy, little approach there. That gives you a little insights into how I work. All right, whew, coming along in this one. I like to talk a lot, don't I? All right, I got a couple of personal questions. This is from Andrew M. on an email. Actually, he saw me on Periscope, actually, but said, what skill would you learn if it could be downloaded into you Matrix style? You know, the movie The Matrix, where he like plugs in Keanu Reeves' head and like downloads how to do karate or something in 10 seconds. For me, I have a practical answer and a slightly less practical answer. My practical answer of something that I would really love to do would be to be a nib tuner, like a master nibmeister person, like to be able to do that kind of work. It takes, you know, quite a while and quite a bit of practice to be able to do that. I'm very interested in it, and I've done some of it here and there. But to train it up, it would take a tremendous amount of time, which is my least abundant asset at this point. So if I could just download how to grind an Architect nib or how to, you know, do Spencerian flex on a fountain pen nib, I think that would be awesome. I would, of course, train it to everybody that I could get my hands on. But yeah, I would love to just have that downloaded right into my brain. But slightly less practical answer, less applicable maybe to my business life, would be woodworking. I love woodworking. I don't often get to do it. It takes a tremendous amount of time, and one of the most frustrating, I have a love-hate relationship with woodworking because I'm always learning things as I'm doing it, but it's a constant reminder of how little I know. And I've, you know, one of my favorite books that I read years ago was from Norm Abram, who hosted the New Yankee Workshop for decades on PBS. He wrote a book called Measure Twice, Cut Once. It's mainly a woodworking book, but it's also got a little bit of business leadership type stuff in there, sort of. But, you know, he talks about how, you know, these master craftsmen and stuff like that, they still make mistakes. They've just learned how to hide them so that no one can see them. So I thought that was a really interesting approach of like being really, really good at what you do doesn't mean you don't make mistakes. It just means that you make them so that most other people can't see them. That's part of the masterfulness of it. So being able to do just a variety of woodworking things, building furniture, wood turning, I still love doing that. I just don't get to often right now, but I know if I just had the skills, I would just be able to knock out, you know, masterful things. But half the time I end up just fixing my own mistakes and using tools that are not the right tools, realizing it too late, things like that. That or being able to play piano. I took a couple of lessons. Rachel's mother is a piano teacher. Took a couple of lessons from her in college. I really picked it up fairly quickly, but very quickly plateaued as well because just the time and practice that I would need is too great. I have very long fingers and I have done a variety of instruments, very musical. So I know I would be able to enjoy piano, but it's the kind of thing like unless you do it pretty often or have had years of training and practice, it's really tough to learn. So it's like I would love to be able to play piano, but for me at this point it's just not practical in terms of what I'd have to give up. So it's a choice that I've made, but if I could just download into my brain, be able to play, you know, some Liszt and Rachmaninoff, that'd be awesome. That'd be very cool. All right, Jodi M. This is from an email follow-up to Periscope as well. Periscope's been pretty strong lately. Jodi asked, besides filming videos, what do you do on a typical Goulet day? Yeah, a lot. And let me preface this by saying I always am interested to see what other people's schedules are like because I think it's really fascinating. But at the same time, I follow people like Gary Vaynerchuk. And at the same time that I'm fascinated and motivated by it, I am equally discouraged because of, you know, comparing myself or viewing shortcomings or anything like that. So that is just opening up a little bit of vulnerability right there. I fully recognize by what I'm about to say, I could make you feel bad if you feel that you should be doing similar things or you don't feel good about yourself or whatever. Let me just encourage you, look, what I'm doing right now, it's a lot. It's a lot on my plate. I actually feel like I'm a little imbalanced in terms of working too much right now. Everybody's got a different viewpoint on their balance point, right, between work and life and hobbies and faith and family and all this kind of stuff. I'm a little too heavy on the work side right now. Part of it's because I'm really trying to help out my team, get them stable and get them, you know, I'm really kind of over-indexing in my life in terms of work. I have to watch out for that. I'm very aware of it and I'm being careful about that right now. So I'm going to share with you with what I'm doing right now, but let me preface it by saying I'm not trying to glorify overwork and lack of sleep because that's something that is a little imbalanced in my life right now. But in general, let me show you. This is just a brief snapshot, but we use Outlook to manage our calendar. This is my weekly calendar right now. So I'm on today right here. So I literally have pretty much my entire week booked. Now, it's not like at the beginning of the week every minute is booked up, but there's rarely more than a 15-minute or half-hour gap that I don't have something intentionally planned to work on during the workday. I also use a program called OmniFocus. I've talked in previous Q&As about my productivity methods, and I have a kind of just running to-do lists of other things so that things that I don't have like scheduled and planned and intentionally working on, I have them in the wings so that when I get free moments, I can pull up and fill in with something. So basically I'm doing things all the time. And the reason that is not because I enjoy doing it that way. I'm actually not much of a planner, which kind of seems weird because I just showed you this extremely well planned out calendar. No, it's really not that way. It's because I've realized at this point where I am with my 2 young kids, my wife, my business, I have to schedule things that are important to me so that they don't fall by the wayside. So I am continually evaluating and reevaluating what I have going on in every aspect of my life so that I can make sure that I'm spending my time on the things that are most important to me. Sometimes that ends up looking a little heavy in one side, and I realize I'm sacrificing in some other areas. Right now I'm sacrificing a little bit on my personal relaxation and rejuvenation side of things. This week in particular has been kind of a grind for me, just changing context in every meeting. So let me just kind of take you through a typical day. Like my day today, I'm shooting this Q&A, so I actually made notes on my whole kind of day. So on a typical day, I'll wake up between 5:45 and 6:30. Depends on if I'm working out on that given day. Sometimes I intend to work out, but if I get to bed after a certain time, I'm like, nope, I can't get up early and work out. So I usually end up doing it a couple of days a week. Shower most of the time, get the kids ready for school, get them breakfast, all that kind of stuff. Rachel and I usually end up getting to work at about 8:30 because we have to drop our son off at school and then our daughter off at preschool. So we got 2 different places to drive to before we come into work. And then we'll have a little bit of email catch up, just kind of get myself ready for the day. I'll do a morning check-in with my leadership team at about 8:45, 10-15 minute check-in. 9 to 9:30, I might join in on some other teams and their morning check-ins because everybody does. So we do our leadership team check-in and then we get on the same page, and then from there we do check-ins with all of our teams. And then I might be in on one of those, or I might just be working on emails, kind of planning for the day. I try not to schedule a lot between 9 and 9:30 so that I can kind of get my day straight. 9:30 is usually when my meetings start, and it's just meetings all day pretty much. So if it's not meetings I'm having with other people, it's meetings that I'm scheduling for myself to work on specific projects. I'm doing a lot of strategic planning stuff these days. I might be writing blog posts or doing video things, that kind of stuff. So the context can change a lot on a given day, but I do one-on-ones with all my managers. I'm usually doing 1 or 2 lunches a week, either with business people in the community, or I might be doing lunches with our teams or with various people within our company. So I'm doing a lot of lunch meetings and stuff sometimes. A lot of management by walking around. I try to make intentional time that I can just walk around, get a pulse on how things are going, check in. Oh, we got a huge shipment of something back there. Let me just go check it out. Just kind of making sure that I'm keeping tabs on what's going on. I do a lot of strategic planning things, some intentional kind of brainstorming sessions, stuff like that. Video prep, answering comments, tweets, emails, inspecting kind of quality issues as they come up. I'll do budgeting stuff, sales reviews, brainstorming meetings for blogs, analytics. Basically, I just really touch a lot of different areas, and I've got a good team in place to be able to do a lot of those things, but I want to be able to keep tabs on all that. And then once my workday is done, usually around 5:15, 5:30, Rachel and I go, we pick up our kids, we do dinner. Sometimes we eat out, probably a little too much. Sometimes we cook at home, which is exhausting, but we are trying to do it more. Play with the kids, get them to bed, and then honestly after that, Rachel and I usually talk for a little bit, and then we'll we'll finish up there, and then we'll usually fire up the laptop again and work for another 3 or 4 hours. It's kind of exhausting sometimes. We are trying to work less at night, but sometimes it's just needed in short bursts. So that's usually what goes on. Sometimes we'll Periscope. I'll be prepping Q&A at night, things like that. So I usually get to bed around midnight. I'm trying to be better about that, but that's where I'm at. So it's pretty grueling. I love what I do, which is why I have the energy to do it. But even still, it's tiring for sure. That's why sometimes when I'm Periscoping at 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night and I get comments about I'm being tired, it's because I am. Last question, this is a troubleshooting one. I have an Edison Collier Silver Marble, which I like a lot. Problem is that when I fill it, ink collects beneath the grip. And since much of the grip is translucent white, it looks pretty unattractive. Why does that happen, and what can I do to stop it? Well, basically you have ink that's getting in between your nib housing and your grip. So you can unscrew it out of here. You have your nib housing that screws into the grip section of this pen. Like that. So it could be, especially if you have an eyedropper conversion, it could be ink coming from the back side, or it could be ink that's coming from the front as it's being filled, or it could be water that's left over after the cleaning process. The simplest way to try to combat it, if it's something that really matters to you, take a little silicone grease, put it on the threads here as you're screwing it in place, and then put some silicone grease around the collar of the nib unit here. You might need to really kind of goop it on here, and you want to be careful not to get it on like the feed and the nib and stuff like that. That can take a little bit of delicacy, and you're going to see a little bit of silicone grease probably that's going to be in there, so it may not be perfect. You may find that it's just not really worth it to try to fight it. But silicone grease on there will help to keep it so that ink isn't getting in your grip section. That might be worth giving it a shot. So hopefully that'll help you out. That's it for this week. I do have a question of the week. dealing with the matrix style download thing, I would love to know what skill you would download into your brain matrix style if you could. That's it for this week. Thank you so much. Leave me some comments on YouTube or on the blog. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Check out all of the pens and stuff that I mentioned on gouletpens.com, and I'll be back next week. Hope you have a great week, and write on.